at the very end, I would like to talk about convenient opportunities of using WebCon BPS in your organizations, where to use it. And the agenda for my presentation is as follows. In the beginning, I would like to talk about WebCon BPS platform. What are the benefits of it? Of course, some things we already know, some things will be repeated, but there will be also some new elements about the platform. Then I'm going to talk about 4 more topics or 4 scenarios that show the way you approach the implementation of projects. So we're going to talk about implementation methodologies, so it's going to be agile and waterfall. Then the types of processes from the point of view of their role. So the mission critical and supporting processes. Also the place of BPS when compared with other systems, the systems that we already have in situ. So for instance, BPS and ERP and so on and so forth. And then we'll talk about the complexity of applications, because there are some fairly simple applications, but there are also complex applications, and some applications are rather unconventional, or sometimes it is not really clear whether such applications should be handled by BPS. Now, what does WebCon BPS platform give us? So, as we are developing an application, it's got only 2 attributes and say 3 steps. Out of the box, we get a very transparent outlook of the forms, and due to this, we do not focus on the way those forms have to look like, because obviously it has many different meanings. So we have a standard, and so we focus on the business features of a business process, and if substantive features, and should we come across some more complex elements in a system that need to be documented to a user, so it's easier for the user, because we do not always develop instructions. So in the system, there are places where we can write write a number of simple sentences, so that users have less problems with entering applications. Also in the portal, we have a set of native reports. So once we create an application and once we grant access to the users, even if we forget to define a report, then the user will find their way around the portal. Also, giving authorizations to the application. Authorizations are at a number of different levels, and therefore authorizations may be granted with the use of BPS or SharePoint groups, but it may also happen with the organization that the staff leaves on holidays. It does happen, and someone has got to perform a task, and due to the process of replacements, we can, for instance, recalculate all tasks for a new person, or if there are new tasks, then the new person, the substitute will know what needs to be performed. Or even if you go on holiday, you can still have access to the system and perform a task even when on the beach, but otherwise substitutes will work. And also we may have a 3-step application with only 2 form fields, but we can generate it with the use of Outlook or with the use of a disk. But anyway, any application may be traced and any instance may be traced. So we know exactly who changed what, who is authorized to what, how much time did it take to process an application due to the use of history. There is a view into history, or there are different KPI reports that give access to this type of information. And all these mechanisms are inbuilt in this platform. Therefore, we save on time and we may focus on the substantive issues as far as our systems are concerned. And once we launch the application, we may think about its further lifespan. in the organization. From the point of view of development and from the point of view of application maintenance, there are certain things to do. For instance, instant change technology that we have already mentioned today. Sometimes business requirements change. Therefore, the system has to be adjusted, and this is a non-stop process. What is most important is that we do not have to generate a new application. We simply modify the already existing application. Also, we may reuse the mechanisms that we use for applications, for instance, form rules or templates of actions or global form fields. So we define those attributes once, and then they may be reused elsewhere. And therefore, we can modify the system so as to adjust to the change. And also we may trace any changes in the configuration of the processes. Also, there are reports that help us to debug the system should anything happen. And if there is an error, we can easily find the error and address that error. Also, there is transport between environments. Therefore, we can differentiate the development application from the acceptance tests in the testing environment. But first and foremost, we have a stable production environment. Therefore, we do not interfere with the production environment. And as Marcin has mentioned, in this system, there is a possibility of defining the documentation. Therefore, we can complement the documentation on an ongoing basis using Designer Studios. And therefore, if we need to revisit an element, then that element should be already described there. And if the client asks for a documentation, we can generate it in 3 files, to Word and to Excel. And if our application stops functioning, and if its life cycle is over, then we may archive that process and we can clean the system of all the redundant workflow instances so as to reduce the weight of the database. And also, all of that allows us to approach those applications from the short-term and long-term perspectives. So we have comprehensive mechanisms that we have in the platform, and all of that is the result of our own experience, but also we take into consideration your experience. And whatever you say us, we then implement in production. And due to that, we can automate the work, we improve the work, and we also get rid of multiplication or redundancies. Now, let us move on to a scenario where we look at the application from the point of view of the level of our knowledge about that application. So the platform may be used for the implementation with the use of different methodologies of generating software. And those methods depend on the scope, depend on the state of our knowledge about the application. Let us begin with the first scenario where we know exactly what we need to do. So we have a set of specific requirements. Everything is documented in the analysis report. And usually with this type of processes, we already have some procedures, some internal procedures within an organization that need to be reflected in the system. For instance, most probably those procedures are already in place, and those processes are usually in the finance and quality domains. So something that has already been translated into procedures, and this is a traditional waterfall type of a project where the end of one stage means moving on to the next stage. And this is how we can calculate the time framework. We schedule, we know who and when will be involved, we know what would be the workload for the participants of that project. The next method that we may apply, this is the agile method, and there's something has already been said about agility. As far as the scope is concerned, we more or less know how to do, but we don't have the full set of knowledge. There are some bits of information missing, or the implementation may be done in a number of iterations. And we note that the time framework more or less, but not exactly. We would like to hand over this application to business side as soon as possible, but the system is implemented in 3 or 4 iterations, sometimes more than that. And an example here could be an application for project management. And here a little bit of, it's my cup of tea. So in this application, we have a list of projects. We have a number of staff who would be involved in those projects. We have a list of tasks that are assigned to the members of the staff. And therefore, this system may already be launched in production, and so it may already function, and we can start planning for projects. But in the second iteration, we can add, for instance, the workload planning, future-oriented workload planning, and also verification of declarations. So whatever has been declared has been actually performed. And in the next iteration, we may add a financial perspective and verify whether such projects pay back. We can look into the protocols, whether the invoices for protocols have been paid for or not, and so on and so forth. And in other subsequent iterations, we may develop such an application. And this is an innovative approach. That is the pilot methodology, that is the POC. And as far as the scope is concerned, here we have an idea, only idea. We actually do not know what the application needs to do. We have some minimum requirements, and we're testing the technology. So we need to see whether this technology could be used, and we're also testing business, whether this application will be well received by business and is actually going to be used by business. And this is proofing is very quick, and it's just working hand in glove with business and seeing whether it actually works.
W takim trybie my jeszcze nie wiemy, czy aplikacja zostanie przyjęta.
So we don't know whether the application will be well received or not. If it is not well received, then it's a fast fail case. Adam spoke about fast fails today. But if the application is not well received, we are not sad about it. It's nothing to cry about. It simply means that we have not developed this application in a sufficient manner, so it may be set aside for quite some time. But should it happen that an application is a bullseye hit, then we may immediately proceed with waterfall or agile design. And here I will give you an example, a real example. This is an application for designing labels in alcohol beverages business, and the story is as follows. We received a list of requirements. A consultant designed an application, then traveled to see the client in Warsaw. They sat together with their IT and business people, and they introduced additional functionalities, so they kind of boosted the application, and then it was well received. So the customer took over the application and went on developing it, and during one of the WebCon days they presented it. And another idea, it's the significance of business processes. There's significance. Here, in an organization, there are the core processes that support business activities of an organization, and supportive processes, and they are kind of supporting from the internal point of view. But let us begin with core processes. Those are the processes without which a company may not function. So without such processes, the company simply does not make money. And usually those are business-related processes or client-related processes. And if we switch off a server and a credit application is not processed, then there is a problem, because this means that we lost a deal of our lifetime. Or if we are, say, in a loan environment, and let's say that this is a contract for financing the development of a shopping mall, which is a big project with big amounts of money. And if our customer sends an application and then wants to start up yet another shopping mall, then maybe we should have a look at this company, whether that company is capable of paying the debt. Is it still creditworthy? Therefore, we may use a number of audits. So Of course, the contract may be handled by the BPS, but as far as audits are concerned, audits may be very important, and audits may be carried out on a cyclical basis or on an ad hoc basis, also using BPS.
And thus, the contract is actually going to be performed. And back office is another application. If the system stops working, the company will continue working. These are internal things related to employees, days off, sick leave, and so on and so forth. In some companies, they are supporting processes. In other companies, however, they will be of key importance, just like a law firm. So we have clearly defined SLAs there. This process in such a law firm, this process could be very important and highly sensitive and very much developed too. You approach it differently, so your adventure will begin differently. Some company start with back offices to test their waters. Other clients will begin with sensitive areas where they have an issue in the organization. Others will combine those two approaches. So they come up with this core system. Mind you, the development will take a year or two, because we will keep developing it, because business is bringing new ideas to the table. In parallel, we try to teach the organization and to show them that it can be done. So business trips forms and other simple things are implemented to teach users. And thus, when the core system is already there, they can already use it. They are no longer afraid of it. Once you've taught people in advance, they may simply come to love that new solution, and they are not afraid of it. One thing is sure. Rarely do you finish with just one application being deployed. Usually once you've started, you get more and more. Rightio. Let's consider what systems are already there and where could you place Webcom BPS. Usually ERP system will be already there in the given company. There are also other domain systems. So depending on what you have in the ERP, you will consider where BPS should be located. So in BPS, you can have both core and back office systems, right? So considering that, is it true that all the apps in a company need to be moved to APS, need to be rewritten? Possibly, maybe not at once, not to start with. Let's take an example. Let's look at what you have in an ERP. There you have a number of modules. Certain things, certain events need to be recorded there. But related to those are business processes. At times they are straightforward, at others they are very long, complex, and they reach out the tentacles to different parts of a company. Client satisfaction is a core thing in business, but you get customer complaints even in the best companies. It would be good to have a tool where you can record this information, data of a client, and where you can have people generate the right files, take photos of the documents, and decide what needs to be done about any given complaint. And then the complaint is either rejected or approved. And ultimately, the client also needs to be informed about what's happened to their complaint. And index need to go to database. Imagine that you've got a company that produces yellow ducks in two companies, or toy ducks. You could introduce it into a system. To come up with a system and to affirm it means that a number of departments will be affected. Imagine a chair How many elements does it consist of? How many colors it could be produced in? This chair could have this ultra silent wheels that are not going to scratch our floor, and to design it will be a long-lasting process. It'll be very important for this particular product because it'll be liked by the clients or not. So the question is all of that going to be modeled and consulted in our ERP? An invoice is another example. Yes, it needs to be recorded in the ERP. It needs to be recorded by the accounting. It needs to be reported with the authorities. Well, that's obvious. However, somebody is responsible for the purchase. This is where the whole thing begins. Somebody is responsible for a purchase, and then the accounting department will actually take care of it. And then a given invoice can be to the tune of, well, it could be quite expensive, and then the controlling department will have to see whether it's compliant with the budget or not. And you could model that under ERP, these 4 or 5 acceptances. In BPS, once you know the scope and the requirements, you can actually deploy that kind of an approval process. It can be done quite quickly. Purchasing fixed assets, it can also be quite time-consuming. The same would be true about a change in the users. MPK is not enough. Somebody needs to approve such a shift. Somebody needs to agree. And it might be a multi-stage process. You know, such a fixed asset could be sold at an auction, it could be sold in another way, it could have been destroyed. Many paths there. And another element. Buying goggles or glasses for employees. In a small company, it'll be enough to send an email, or you could simply talk to your manager face-to-face. If you've got a company that employs thousands of people and is geographically dispersed, it might be difficult to control it. You can deploy such a simple process under BPS, and then you will see how many times a given employee has actually filed for these new glasses. Similarly to other things related to employees. Imagine that somebody needs to stay longer at work to complete a project for a client. You know, Friday/Monday. So they would like to collect this overtime at a good moment, good for them. Or maybe they would like to work remotely. So it's difficult to juggle all these details, even when you have as few as 20 employees. And what about a company that employs thousands of people? Most of these processes can be controlled under ERP, but what if ERP is affected somehow? What I mean by that? What could happen to the ERP system? For a number of reasons, we need to change the ERP system, because a company might have been taken over by somebody else, or the headquarters is making us purchase an ERP because the old system is no longer supported, or is too difficult or expensive to maintain, and so on and so forth. There could be different reasons. Or quite the opposite. You need to keep your legacy ERP system, but it was created in the 80s, while you need to add new functionalities to this old legacy system. Another scenario, ERP manages the headquarters that is located in a different country. So we file for this new functionality to be delivered, but there is a time zone difference and the organizational structure is dispersed and everything takes time to approve and deploy. And this local IT department would like to meet the business needs, but still the business needs to wait. And another example, you could have different ERP systems within an organization or the same system that has many additions. And we would like to centralize our services. We would like to have a service within a group related to invoicing or something else. And we would like to have one single interface. Magda mentioned it today. Really, it doesn't matter what system is running in the background. It's about this interface that a user will see. So, if you have business processes outside of ERP, it helps you because ERP changes and the processes are going to stay. So ERP could go hand in hand with BPS. So do we ask you to move ERP to BPS? Well, we are not going to encourage you to do that, but there is a company that actually succeeded there. Where BPS is located, when we are communicated with our client and we have different existing systems. You've got an invoice, sales invoice. You could generate it under ERP. The printers generated by the ERP are not looking great, though. And the legal department, they have those beautiful new contracts they've deployed, and we really like those. So you could use the ERP, and you could generate the same thing under Webcom BPS, but the clients would like to get more files. You could aggregate them in a report in your BI. And these reports could also be sent to Webcom BPS. And it's going to redistribute that invoice as a task for users that are going to print out those invoices and send those snail mail to a client, because this is the channel that you use with a given client. Also, the client could use those to clients via email, or you could have a special portal, a special platform, and there a client will collect that given document whenever is comfortable for them. www forms, another example. So you've got a client, they send something from outside, and such a document begins its life. This could be about a customer complaint. A www form is filled in, then a document is generated, it starts circulating, and mind you, a decision could be shared under ERP. A warehouse document could be generated in this way. Also, you could send this information via an email or a text message if you've got a gate. Also, you could generate a task for a person so that this particular person could consult a client. And another form in www could be a sales of land. You've got this form and you could inform a developer that you've got this great plot for sale. And a developer learns about it, their own purchasing department learns about that, and there they actually look into that. EU subsidies forms is another thing. This goes to BPS via www, and there the decision process moves on. BPS as a middleware. Continued. Quick loan using scoring systems or brokers. They work in various task-oriented systems. At the end of the month, the BI will aggregate all this info and issue a report, and also an invoice is going to be issued. Report processing. Our company has been taken over by another company. It is not known whether or rather what new processes are going to be implemented. They just want info. And the simple task, reprocess a report generated elsewhere, and this info is generated and approved and passed on elsewhere. And permits, entry permits. So basically, you can have information about who can have access on a given site. Access control to various buildings or sites in a given plant. Badge color coding. Such a color can also be significant because these colors will tell us whether we can disclose confidential information to such a person or rather not. What about universities? A student's card can be linked to library pass, and then when somebody's been flunked out of a university, that particular card will no longer be valid. And the last scenario to be discussed today, app complexity. Mind you, the division is quite, it's all blurred because one app could be considered complex in one company and quite the opposite in another. Or maybe we might assume that the implementation is straightforward and turns out that it's quite the opposite. Applications for leave is a good example. Looks straightforward at first glance, but usually turns out to be quite the opposite. Let's start with something simple. 2-3 steps, that's what I have in mind. A few fields in a form only. Invoice register. Contract archive. You could begin with something simple so that you teach the organization that all the documents need to be delivered to a special place and you don't model the process itself. You use the OCR, the text layer is applied, so you can use the document to make it searchable. No longer do you need to browse through hard copies. You can use searchable digital documents. Tasks. This is the easiest entry. You can set those tasks and then you can expand them depending on needs and distribute to various areas in the company. Another thing is a survey informing us on missing equipment. Every quarter or so, it's good to know whether the equipment is actually working, and some people are introverts are not going to report it. So basically, thanks to such a survey, you will know whether work is continued or not. What about renting a car for a business trip? You will learn, or rather, you give an option of reporting issues with a given company car. Lunch app, you've already heard of it, I believe. Recently expanded it. We added a prepaid module. Eva saves a lot of time because of that. You can pay in an amount and the system will simply calculate it. When the system runs out of money, a message is sent to a user to top up their account. Help desk is another thing. Usually it's associated with IT processes. However, HR or legal also get different queries. So it'd be good to report those and track those to make sure that maybe to see whether one person is not reapplying for the same thing a number of times. Ideas. Another thing. You could embed them in the existing processes, and it's about simplifying process within process, and then the users will feel that process adapted to their needs. And they can improve them live.
Odseparować jako
And of course, this improvement process may be separated as a standalone button to be pushed on, and then we will develop a bank of ideas for new projects. And time sheet is another process. This is a working time monitoring system. It's a cross-check just to see whether all the tasks were tracked and whether the day has, if the working time within the day is correct, just 8 hours. So all of those projects could be upgraded, but it's good to begin with something simple and easy to use. We can have core processes, and there we can make a mix. We may begin with implementing the simple things to begin with. Right. So we and you, we have also have been implementing very complex applications worthy of space travel. And each of those applications may consist of 5, 10, 20, 30 processes with many approval levels, with many people engaged in processes. And an example is a heat delivery service, which is a comprehensive application. It's a comprehensive system that begins with a decision for servicing residential facilities, assigning contracts for heat energy delivery, servicing clients, informing the maintenance teams that, for instance, a heat delivery system should be opened, made available for some residential areas. It also includes the analysis of different parameters, heat energy measuring, and also technical failure servicing. And there are leasing or loan processes for helicopters, harvesters, ambulances, and so on and so forth. And they may operate in different modes for different types of products. Sometimes it could work as maintenance-free fast track decision making, or sometimes it needs to include a margin approval, risk analysis, bidding, tendering, scheduling of payments, and signing agreements. So it's very complex. Another example of a complex application would be car life cycle management. So a company deals with long-term lease of cars, and this is also a complex application from time of purchase through the settlements of contracts, processing of invoices, also, for instance, servicing the car, maintaining the car, replacing tires, and each of those applications, and also servicing road police fines imposed on the driver. This may be important. So this is one of those more complex applications. And sometimes it is that a solution is not available in out-of-the-box solution, or customization of an out-of-the-box solution is quite expensive, or out-of-the-box is too big. For instance, a small craft brewery cannot buy an out-of-a-box solution, and they usually have several systems, but a small brewery does not need to have a big solution. And therefore, the quality of the flow of information will have to be managed in such a company as well. Therefore, there is a BPS system tailor-made for a small brewery. There we can take care of brewing process stages. We register recipes, which is top secret. Obviously, there is the expiry date, there is the validity date for label segmentation of customers, and many other processes. And what is most important, that system notifies by email or by text message the pub staff about different pieces of information, and this is how the pub can work in normal hours and not necessarily with overtime. And another application is the HR module. Sometimes we do not need to buy the entire ERP to provide for services. For instance, we're planning days of free, the free time in Germany. This differs actually from land to land. Therefore, we can assign what are the free days of work, and this is how we can generate applications for holiday leaves. And we can also process agreements and access to agreements. So little and yet so much. Now, SOP, which is the system of staff evaluation. And once you invite a consultant, the consultant make the system very comprehensive and complex. It may turn into quite a big application, or there may be some specific requirements of the customer as far as the view of functionalities are concerned. Or, for instance, booking accommodation. There was this project in a company that was working in Germany, and they have their own accommodation base. And once we allocate a person to work in a project in Germany, that system verifies the availability of accommodation as close as possible to the project, and then that member of the staff receives a booking at that particular hotel or accommodation. Also, they verify whether the member of the staff is not staying too long in Germany, and also it generates all the business trip documentation. Another application is opening up outlets. So once a site is selected, or for instance, we would need to take a decision whether this site is good for a shop outlet or not. And then we may use this application. We may design the appearance of the shop. We launch the shop, and then, if necessary, we may relocate the shop, or we can refurbish the shop once it's already inside a shopping mall. And there are some unconventional applications. Sometimes we are surprised by the way you use the system. How about B2B scenarios? It's not only for accounting, but also for legal services. We see that legal services start using this platform. Or how about an application for the distribution of electronic coupons for members of the staff or members of family for the products that are sold by your company or produced by your company. Or a workflow, but inside it works like the eBay auctioning. So this could be auctioning for a car or furniture or office equipment, but you can auction it within a company. Then sensoric tests of vodka. There is this company where alcohol drinking is allowed, provided that once you taste alcohol, you describe your sensations in a special system, and that is BPS system. Or how about lab tests? In this application, we define norms for some raw materials that are transported to the warehouse facility. Then we test the raw materials, and we are looking for viscosity, permeability, and other very difficult to pronounce names of lab tests that they do. And for instance, if a raw material doesn't meet the requirements, you return it to the vendor. And the last one is content management. For instance, this could be content management of university websites, where both the university staff and students may, for instance, notify that some content is still missing or something changed, and then one can post content and pictures to web portals. And this may include the module responsible for settlements with the authors of content, provided the content has been published. So, generally speaking, it is impossible to describe all possible processes and applications that may be used. It's very difficult to describe all of your ideas, but usually a client statistically has approximately 20 workflows. Some companies, though, have as many as 300 applications with different level of complexity, from very simple to highly complex. And some companies have implemented 2 or 3 processes, and then they said enough. So they have those processes as their in-house processes, but then 2 or 3 years later they come back with new ideas and with new implementations. And the Webcom BPS platform gives a possibility of developing any application you might possibly think of. Thank you very much.